Hi folks, my name's Tim. I just retired today. I have a lot of things that I hope to share, but on this video, the thing that I'm sharing is a discussion about the bucket strategy for retirement financial planning. There's been a zillion videos about this, and none of them covered, I think, a bottom line summary of what's going on with the bucket strategy. I wanted to share that with you. The bucket strategy is useful for thinking about your asset allocation, but whether you have 2 buckets for a barbell or 3 buckets or 5 buckets, the math ends up rolling up all into 1 bucket, and you don't really have 3 buckets. The exception is if you have one account for each bucket. So I wanted to show you the math around that and really give you a very simplified summary of what's going on with it. I am not using the bucket strategy, but whether you're using a bucket strategy or not, it's all 1 bucket, and I'm going to show you that. I created a spreadsheet in Google Sheets, and we're going to walk through that right now. Thank you. I have modeled a bucket strategy. It's a 3 bucket strategy, and you could do this with any number of buckets. You could do 2 buckets, which would be a barbell, or you could do 4 or 5, etc. In my case, it's just 3 buckets. So we have the first bucket, which is our near-term money. I've made it 4 years and made it 50% cash, 50% bonds. And here it is graphically. And then bucket number 2 is our midterm bucket. It's 90% bonds, 10% stocks. And I just chose that for the model. You could plug in any allocation into that bucket that you want to show what I'm about to show. All right, bucket 2, there's blue, those are the stocks, the red is the bonds. All right, bucket 3 is a 20-year bucket, and it's 90% stocks and 10% bonds. And so there's the big field of blue of stocks and then some bonds. Right, so that is the 3 bucket strategy. It probably looks familiar to many of you out there. And now let's look at the actual model behind this graphic and what I did for this model. And again, you could use any numbers. The math pretty much works the same. Well, not pretty much, it absolutely works the same. In this case, the yearly expenses that are going to be pulled from this portfolio for this person is $20,000 a year. The total portfolio value that this person has is $600,000. And the duration that the money will be pulled is 30 years. I call it remaining life because in planning retirement, we all have to decide when we're going to die, so we know how much time we will incur costs. Okay, so let's look at bucket 1. Here's the near-term bucket. The spreadsheet says it's 4 years. The bucket value is $80,000. 4 years times $20,000 is $80,000. Bucket 2, 6 years. 6 years times $20,000 a year, $120,000. Bucket 3, 20 years times $20,000 is $400,000. Total portfolio is $600,000. Now, to keep this model simple, I don't have any growth. I don't have any growth showing in expenses. There isn't growth or decline in portfolio values. That can easily be put into this to demonstrate it, but we don't really need it to demonstrate the concept that I'm trying to demonstrate. Okay, bucket 1, stock allocation 0, 50-50 bond and cash. Thus we have 40,000 bonds, 40,000 cash. Bucket 2, 10% stocks, 90% bonds, 0 cash. And here's the values of stock, bonds, cash in bucket 2. Bucket 3, 90% stocks, 10% bonds, stock value $360,000, bond value $40,000, 0 in cash. But lo and behold, what happens when you add up, when you just look at the total amount of stocks, the total amount of bonds, and the total amount of cash? Well, you get these numbers, 372, 188, and 40, and that's really your asset allocation across your whole portfolio. And what does that look like? So it looks like this. And what we see here is that we have 62% stocks across the whole portfolio, 31% bonds across the whole portfolio, and almost 7% in cash, $40,000 in the portfolio. So when you run the numbers on what's actually happening in the bucket strategy, is you're really just cutting up a standard portfolio allocation across a bucket concept. And I think, and here's the buckets again. When we look at the bucket strategy, we're always thinking bucket 1, bucket 2, bucket 3, and then how do we fill this bucket, and how do we fill that bucket? You're still just creating an asset allocation across your whole portfolio. And I think there is some value in thinking buckets to determine what your overall allocation should be. So yeah, first 4 years you have this allocation, second this allocation, third this allocation. But in terms of filling buckets, really all you're creating is this overall allocation. And when we start thinking of filling buckets, all you really should be doing is rebalancing your portfolio. Now you may choose to change your allocations, so you consciously choose to change your allocations between cash, bonds, and stocks, and you could do that based on a number of years. But in the end, you're just doing a reallocation or rebalancing if you don't change anything. There's a million videos about rebalancing. You could simply sell off an equal amount of everything and then buy the amount of each asset to regain the correct allocation. And you're done. Okay, folks, one more time. Here are your 3 buckets. Each bucket has its own distribution of stocks, bonds, and cash that you set up. These buckets simply add up into your total portfolio, which really is your one bucket with its resulting distribution of stocks, bonds, and cash. So you could set up the same risk approach that you're taking and simply implement that in one bucket. Because if you implement it in 3 buckets, well, you're really implementing it in one bucket. However, it gets complicated when you go to fill your buckets. Whereas if you're looking at one bucket with its total allocation that you put together, you'll have a much easier time in rebalancing, achieving the same risk level that you are trying to achieve using buckets.
I haven't seen a video that lays out the analysis that I just demonstrated. There may be some, or I might have missed it in some of the videos I already watched. Some of the folks that have done one or more, some of them many more videos on the bucket strategy are Rob Berger, Prana Wealth Management, Kuhn, Heritage Wealth Planning, Aaron Talks Money, Christine Benz, and
Okay,
there's
so
many,
what
many
is
more.
the bucket strategy useful for? It is useful for determining what allocations you want to make, and you're taking the number of years that you want certain allocations. So if you want 4 years of cash, well, that guides your allocation of cash. If you want to include in that bucket a very safe bucket, bonds, put some bonds in there. In bucket 2, if you want to make that 6 years like we did, that's fine. You make it 6 years, but that gives you just the size of the buckets. There's nothing special about the buckets. The buckets are actually virtual entities, and I believe they complicate things when you go to try to fill the buckets. I've seen many videos where the creator struggles with describing how they go about filling the buckets, because they now cut up their portfolio into those buckets, and those buckets separate allocations, and then they make decisions based on, okay, pull from this bucket, pull from that bucket, etc. So I think it overcomplicates it. And I've also seen videos where people end up attempting to do market timing rather than following a routine portfolio rebalancing action. So once you remove the view of your portfolio in the buckets and you zoom out to the full portfolio view, again, you just get an allocation of various asset types across your whole portfolio. So just rebalance your whole portfolio and the buckets will naturally follow by themselves. Anyways, that's what I wanted to say. I hope some of you got something from this video. I had not seen this aspect covered, and so I wanted to share it with you. Anyways, I'll see you next time. Tim is out.